with us, so we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kelton Artuso, and I am Programs and Services Manager at Philanthropy Massachusetts. We're glad to have you with us this morning at Alliances, Mergers, and Strategic Restructuring. This workshop is offered by the Massachusetts Community Foundation Partnership. As you may know, the partnership is made up of 14 Massachusetts-based community foundations who have come together since the start of the coronavirus pandemic to pool resources to strengthen the nonprofit community. My organization, Philanthropy Massachusetts, as well as the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network, are so pleased to work with the foundations to bring these resources to the Massachusetts nonprofit communities. I'm joined today by a presenter, Sandy McKinley, who I'll introduce in a moment, as well as Phyllis Corkum of Philanthropy Massachusetts, you may see in the chat, and we'll be helping out with today's session. We are thrilled to be joined by Sandy of Sector Wind this morning. Over the past months, Sector Wind has been working with nonprofits on adapting financial strategies during this uncertain time. The Community Foundation Partnerships has worked with Sandy on multiple workshops to provide nonprofits with the tools and guidance they need to navigate their finances. I do want to cover some logistical elements before we start this morning's session. We do ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentation. And I'd also encourage you to select this speaker view at the top of your screen so that the active speaker will appear more prominently on your screen. If you have any questions during any part of the presentation, please feel free to submit them in the chat box to everyone, or if you would prefer, you can submit them directly to me and I can pose them to Sandy. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please feel free to let us know in the chat box at any time. You do also have the option to access closed captioning for this morning's session. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a live transcript option with the CC icon. If you click that, a live transcript will appear. We are recording this session and we'll distribute it afterwards. One last thing before I hand it over to Sandy, I did want to mention that we do have a couple more workshops coming up in the next few weeks through the Community Foundation Partnership. Sandy will be joining us again on March 9th for Telling Your Organization's Story for Impact. And on March 18th, we will have Julia Campbell with us to discuss marketing your mission and services in a distracted digital world. We will share the links to where you can access those registrations in the chat box. And we will be holding additional programs through April, and I'll share where you can find that as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to Sandy.
Thanks, Kelton. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. It's great to see some familiar names who have been with us in previous webinars, and I appreciate everyone coming out on a sunny, at least in my town, Tuesday morning to talk about alliances, mergers, and strategic restructuring, which is a mouthful to say all at once. So with that, I just want to talk a little bit about what we plan, what our agenda is today. First, I really want to talk just a little bit of context setting, set some core understanding and some basic understanding about what the spectrum of what I'll just call collaboration is. And then we'll talk a little bit about we'll talk about the opportunities and barriers to collaboration. What are some why would we want to think about collaboration? What are the opportunities in it? And then what are some of the things that trip us up and how might we avoid those? And then finally, just talking a little bit about assessing our own readiness and readiness to collaborate in whatever means it might be right for our organization. And then how do we think about that other side of the table, that partner or partners, and assessing if it's a good fit. So that's really what our goal is for our time today. So my work sector, I'm a financial consultant. I work on financial health and strategic resilience, and that is something that I hope is an aspiration for everyone. It's not always the easiest thing to come by, but again, to think about, what my goal and my aspiration is for each of your organizations. Strategic resilience is really the ability for us to anticipate and adapt to that ever-changing environment while maintaining our focus on our mission and our long-term goals. So really thinking about, like, how do we maneuver in times of change or challenge and opportunity without kind of losing our North Star. And financial health is, do we have the types and amounts of money to cover our full cost of delivering our services and programs while being able to have enough money to handle risk and pursue opportunity. Again, not always the easiest thing, but again, our aspirations. So when I work with organizations individually or in groups like today, I'm always thinking about how do we not only just think about building our strategic alliances or our collaborations, but are we doing that with our mission, our community in mind? Are we building that strategic resilience for our organization? Are we helping to build that financial health? So I'm going to start first by, gosh, what do we mean by collaboration? And I think it's been my experience, and I don't know if it's been any of yours at all, that people kind of come at this from different angles, but I do want to say, let's kind of dig in and define, like, kind of what do we mean by collaboration. So kind of at the top, we have to think about, any collaboration has to have some type of mission alignment. Considering a collaboration in the nonprofit world, doesn't in a way doesn't make sense unless there's some type of mission alignment. For example, like in the for-profit world, profits typically drive collaboration or mergers, but nonprofits exist to build a more kind of just society, and that common purpose really must be at the heart of our decision to collaborate. From there, we want to talk about really just that community focus, right? So is this right for those we serve? And I allow, you should self-define community, right? So community or constituent. So is this in the, not just mission driven, but is this really in the best interest of our community and those we serve? And just orienting and thinking about, like, why are we doing this? Is it for whose benefit? Moving from there, we want to think about, is this strategic? Meaning that the decision to pursue a venture should be tied to your strategy in some way. It should have, and it should have the commitment of the whole organization behind it. And we'll talk about how do we set those goals? How do we assess that vision for what we want from any collaboration? From there, when we're thinking about our partners and any potential partners, we want to think about, do we have shared goals, right? We want to make sure that we enter into any collaboration, then that there are clearly articulated shared goals. Next, we want to think about, we have to acknowledge that a collaboration, just by definition, in the way that we're going to talk about it today, requires change. We are committing to change something. For the most part, there are informal kind of collaborations, but what we're going to talk about today requires some sort of change. It doesn't have to be huge change. It could be monumental change, but it does require change. For the most part, when we talk about collaboration, we're thinking about it, because it is strategic, it's really in the long term. We're looking in that long view. And finally, this is board approved. This is something that is, when we think about collaborations, it is, how are we working? It's at the organizational level. It's not something that, a program director makes on his or her, a decision that a program director makes on his or her own. It is something that that is an institutional it's an institutional a decision. And again, depending on the level of collaboration or the depth of the collaboration, different it requires different decision making processes. But it is an organization agreeing to work outside of itself. So frequently when I talk about collaboration and I talk with either funders or I talk with organizations or I talk with just general like people like the public, one thing that I typically hear, oh gosh, yes, we want to collaborate. So it's going to be that I'm going to use my neighbor organization space, and that's how we're going to collaborate. So it's a kind of an informal collaboration. There might not be any transaction of money. There might be some mission alignment, but it's really an informal collaboration. And then on the other side, you hear people talking about mergers, right? And then there's this whole vast middle that is left undefined. So what I'd like to do, collaboration gets like there's so many meanings. So I would like to think about, I'd like for us to talk today about just defining collaboration as and using the degree of integration as kind of our yardstick, and thinking about like collaboration really depends on how much integration how much integration exists between organizations. So the first degree is exactly the first thing the first thing I talked about. It's really coordination. It could be information sharing. It could be joint planning. It could be I agree to refer you to this. But it's efforts by two or more organizations to just have mutually beneficial results. So it's really thinking like how can we, in a way, kind of how can we be friends? How can we benefit each other? There's nothing wrong with that. It's great. We do this naturally, I think, and it's kind of how it's part of our social capital, our community capital that we have with other mission-driven organizations. From there, we have kind of the next step is really, this is where we are exchanging what I call kind of revenue expense sharing. And this is where we're really entering in some sort of contract or agreement that impacts our dollars in or dollars that we spend. It's contracting of kind of our administrative functions to administer, like to increase our kind of, in a way, our administrative efficiency of our organizations or one or more organizations, right? So it's really thinking about how do we either bring in like a kind of share revenue. So it could be like a group of community-based organizations that are looking to bid on a contract together, and the power of the collective is more than just going by themselves. Or it could be a shared services model where there is kind of some expense sharing, administrative consolidation on the back end. From there, if we go deeper into integration, we're really saying, hey, listen, can we get into some operational or programmatic venture? So this could look like joint programming, launching or managing one or more programs to deepen the mission of the participating organization. So it can achieve like complementary programming, cross-sector initiatives, but it's really integrated into what two organizations are doing, aligned for a similar purpose. And unlike the coordination, where it's more casual, this is really much more kind of contracted, right? There is an agreement, it's bound by time, it frequently has money or expense related to it, but there is much more alignment and planning that goes into it. And it is in a way more formal. It's an extension of operational programmatic work that operational or programmed or operational activities. So from there, we start getting to, in a way, much more, I would say, corporate agreements, right? So this could be what I call the management agreements. The first is really thinking of a program transfer. This is when one organization might say, hey, listen, this out of school time program no longer is working for us because the organization down the street really has expertise in this. And what we want to do is transfer our program, shift our contract and to this other organization. Either they're doing it better, it's a better fit. It's frequently used to address mission creep. It's a sometimes organizations do a demonstration project that then it turns out to not be fully aligned with where they thought it was going. That project may have been in response to a one-time funding opportunity, and now they're looking to steward that program somewhere else. So that's what I call kind of that management agreement. A parent subsidiary agreement or relationship is kind of a deeper level of integration. And this is where kind of, and there are various levels of this, but this is where typically one organization or organizations are combining one of the partner's administrative functions and some of its programmatic services. And there is a combination of organizational assets. Now, like I said, the structures of these are infinite based on the agreements. Typical parent subsidiaries are where there is a governance and an administrative change, but organizations preserve the identity and the visibility of each organization. So they're not a full merger, but they retain independence, but there is a more kind of formal integration and agreement between the two organizations. And then there's the real formal integration. So the way I like to think about joint venture is two organizations come together to make a new organization that's out, but those two organizations still exist. So that's a joint venture. We're going to go in on this together and create that third organization. And then there's the merger, which is where two organizations integrate all of their program and administrative functions. It's two or more. And they do it for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about some of those reasons. But it is really taking two organizations and making a third entity. Now that third entity may, for branding reasons or other reasons, retain the name of one of the previous organizations, but structurally it is a third and independent organization. So with the spectrum of collaboration, my advice to funders and to clients and nonprofits is that structure needs to follow follow our objectives, our goals, right? So one size does not fit all. In other words, like form has to follow function. So really talking about what are our goals in our collaboration will help to dictate what that ideal structure is. So rather than starting with the starting with the we want to have a joint programming agreement, I want us to take a step back and say, what are we really trying to accomplish? And then let's think about what the right structure might be for that on the spectrum of collaboration. And then, so the point being that, so I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I see, is that people come into the conversation around collaboration with that predefined structure. And I think that we save ourselves a lot of time and sometimes heartache if we take that step back and are open to different structures at the beginning. So I want to name the big elephant in the room around any time I do a talk about collaboration, strategic restructuring, and mergers. And that is there is this narrative out there of one, there's too many nonprofits, and we get asked, or there's a narrative out there, well, why don't you just merge? And whether it's a funder or a politician or a well-meaning donor, this notion that nonprofits get together and collaborate might be, it can be a kind of a great spark for a successful collaboration, but it does not necessarily set us up for success. So in addition to really understanding the level of integration that the function or the goals of a collaboration or collaboration might have, we also have to think about like the intent and who's asking us to do this. So on mergers specifically, right, on that far end of the spectrum, I wanted to say a couple of things. Mergers are voluntary, right? Ideally they should originate internally, and they should not be externally mandated, right? They're not something that we should be waiting for people to tell us to do that. Now, it's not to say that we can't be approached by a partner organization to inquire as to our interest, but this, I think a lot of nonprofits feel very pressured by the sector and the narrative out there, but it has to be voluntary. It has to be community focused, right? It has to be with leading with mission and with the community in mind, and really holding those beneficiaries and constituents really at the center. Mergers are not miracle cures. They aren't. They are complicated. They require a lot of time and money. They are not inexpensive, and they take a lot of time, and they take a lot of board time, and they take a lot of staff time. And so it is a very serious undertaking. And finally, they are just, as we just saw, they are not the only option for collaboration. There are other things around mergers and around this narrative too, just around, why in many ways it's a good thing that so many organizations exist, right? Organizations are typically bubble up because there is no market solution to the problem that is being addressed, right? And so that's actually a good thing. But we want to be constantly assessing, does that need still exist in our community, and especially in communities of communities of color, communities that are typically underserved, smaller organizations that have been community built and are community centered often feel the pressure of merging, but but those organizations serve a really specific need and specific constituents. And I think sometimes we get very we don't do those constituents and those communities, we do them a disservice by encouraging them to consolidate and merge, because we are not being sensitive or insightful into what is truly needed. Vu Lee was like reading my mind last week when he published his blog post on February 15th. Stop expecting nonprofits to merge. It's annoying. This is a hyperlink in the slide deck that will go next, that will come out to you later today, and it really talks a little bit more about just the equity behind this narrative of merger, and so I encourage you, if you haven't read it, to read it, because it's spot on. So moving on, I want to talk a little bit about, like, why would we ever want to go into a collaboration, right? And there are many reasons. I pulled out really 4 for us to talk about today, and just for us to just reflect as part of the first part of reflection. If you're a board member, if you're a funder, if you're a nonprofit leader, if you're a curious bystander. But the first, first reason we think about collaboration is to improve, expand, or preserve services, right? So this could be, it could be around innovation, it could be around reaching more people, it could also be around keeping services available to the community. So similar groups collaborate to provide each other a steady flow of clients, relieving program staff of like job-related burden. So maybe one organization is really good at getting, say as a human service organization, they're really good at bringing in clients, and another organization isn't so great at bringing in clients, but they have the capacity to serve. That might be a really great, a really great collaboration where they could do some contract sharing or some administrative sharing, and split the split the administrative and delivery and the delivery functions. It could just result in a holistic approach to serving clients. You could also think about expanding your offering or services without necessarily increasing your budget, right? So thinking on that spectrum of collaboration, if you're thinking of improving or expanding services, like how could you do that without necessarily making that direct investment yourself? The second tends to be the most popular reason, right? And that is really operational efficiencies. And sometimes we hear this, especially from our funders and donors, around like cost savings. The reality is that nonprofits are pretty lean. We very rarely see organizations that have an expense problem. It's more that organizations have a revenue problem. But we'll say a little bit about this later, but there is motivation at times for achieving some economies of scale. So the idea that organizations could potentially save money through joint purchasing, shared use of transportation, shared facilities, creating a consolidated vendor program or joint staff training, like those are operational efficiencies. You can think too about like, back office. These things are really, these shared activities are truly motivated by those cost savings. So in one way or another, you're asking yourself, am I better to like either build this on my own, or do I share this, or can I buy this in some way with or from another organization? The third reason is really kind of the crisis reason, or to mitigate risk. And it's possible, and I think a lot of people, some folks are thinking about this right now in the moment of crisis, like how can we come together to make it through the crisis? And it's possible that through collaboration, partners are able to kind of share the risk, kind of inherent in certain moments. It's also a time when we think about mitigating risk of when you're when you're kind of innovating, right? And so we've seen a lot of kind of collaboration, a little bit, maybe to the middle left of that spectrum, during the pandemic, when groups are coming together to kind of buy, share, and use technology platforms for delivery of services, right? I work with an organization that was using staff to for intake, and using staff that would not have otherwise been used for intake, to deliver their virtual programs. So two organizations working together as a way to kind of collaborate and preserve jobs, but they had a kind of a formal agreement between two organizations to share staff with to share one part of their staff, so that they could weather the crisis together. So thinking about risk and crises. And the last one is really leadership transition. Thinking about, and this happens frequently. It happens kind of more toward the right-hand side of the collaborative scale, but at moments of transition, we tend to be reflective and ask ourselves, is this the right time for us? Are we right to continue in the same way that we always have continued? Is this the right structure for us? Do we continue? Is there an opportunity for us to partner, to collaborate, or to merge as we go through a leadership transition, typically with leaders that are founding leaders, dynamic leaders, sometimes frequently in the arts. But regardless of motivation, this is our key question. will this collaboration result in a greater impact for our community and increased stability for the organization? Regardless kind of our motivation, this is the question we're always going to be asking, and I'm always going to be coming back to. So just like there are reasons, right? There are also kind of barriers, and we're going to go through these in depth so that we can address how to kind of break through the barriers. The first is time and money, right? These collaborations take like work, time, and money. So let's acknowledge that and say that that's something that we have to that needs to be addressed, and we have to go in with our eyes open. The second is know-how, or our ability to our knowledge around this, how to do this. In a way, this is our easiest to break through, because we can all learn and access resources around how to do things. The third is the hardest. It's trust. We are humans serving humans. We are humans interacting with humans, and and any type of collaboration is asking us. It's a dance between trust and control. And so building trust to enter into a fulsome collaboration at any level is frequently one of the hardest things that that we have to break through in any type of collaboration. And we will talk about this. And finally, risk. There is financial risk, there's reputational risk, there's programmatic risk, but there is just like there is an opportunity with collaboration to mitigate risk. Risk is sometimes a barrier to collaboration. I'll talk a little bit about the trust issue, but there's a kind of a derivative of trust is culture. Um, I'm a big fan of introspection for organizations and telling truth to ourselves first before we kind of go outside of our organization. But recognizing that our culture, our organizational culture, and our potential collaborators, our culture has to fit. If culture can make it or break our best intentions. And so recognizing that first, that everyone in our organization, especially as we get to the right side of that collaborative spectrum, everyone is really aligned with our motivations, goals, our own organizational strengths, and our timeline for our collaboration. So really thinking first, who are we as an organization? What are our values? And then thinking through, and we will talk about this in how to do this in a bit. Like, what do we want out of a collaborator, and how do we work best? That is culture is the thing that I frequently see as being a big determinant of success or failure. So the first thing I'll say is we'll talk about some of the barriers. So first, let's talk about know-how. So really understanding why, like, must we collaborate to fulfill our mission? Why, who are the right partners? How do we know? Like, these are the questions that we're asking ourselves if we're even starting to think about collaboration. And like I said, knowledge in some ways is really the easiest thing to kind of overcome. Although each collaboration is different, a lot of it has been done before. And the good news, and those can see kind of fragmented and lonely, there are resources and experts available to kind of help explore, plan, implement, and help think through collaborative ventures. But addressing these points is all part of kind of overcoming the barriers of, we just don't know what it would look like, so we aren't even going to try, right? So that's the emotional thing that we want to get over, is thinking about, okay, well, like, let's just put some things down on paper. How do we start getting how do we start engaging in just a basic and candid planning practice? How do we understand our organizations? Like, what strengths are we bringing to the table? And thinking about, like, how do we discuss our challenges internally? And then thinking about, also identifying organizations that we might want to collaborate with. From my experience, not revealing any secrets, the best collaborators are probably somebody in your network already. So addressing what our knowledge gaps are relatively easy to access, but I think sometimes we just have to get over our own fear of the unknown, or that something is new for us. And so, how do we start to engage in that type of planning? Next up is really, thinking about time and money. Um, Implementing collaboration does not happen overnight. CEOs and executive directors who are in the middle of their collaboration work often comment that the fact that the work can feel like a second job on top of the running kind of the day-to-day organization. And again, based on like the spectrum of on where they fall kind of on the spectrum. Um, you know, so time. And typically this starts at the for more intense collaborations, more integrated collaborations. This really starts at the leadership and the board level. So then, also thinking about how engaged are your boards going to be. On the financial side, there are real costs there could be real costs of pursuing a collaboration. We'll talk a little bit more about this later specifically, but everything from consultants and lawyers to rebranding. But because of these added costs, that idea of cost savings in the short term can be difficult to realize. There's sometimes to be, and despite kind of the wishes of our funders and sometimes donors, there can be some financial disincentives for us to collaborate or even more intensely, or like merge or merge. So we just have to think about it's unfortunately the case that sometimes like there's a disincentive for us to collaborate, and just to name that and be open in order for us to name that ahead of time. In order to mitigate this, I just draw people back to centering on collaboration for mission reason first. This gets back to a theme that I already mentioned, but focusing on mission as the primary driver will ensure that it takes it'll take like it will be kind of in a way most efficient, because you are seeing the North Star. You are knowing what you are working for. You have a goal. Another best practice is really thinking about ensuring that you have that task force, right? And a good project manager. This needs to move forward. It needs to move forward on a timeline. So really thinking about like, how do I manage this? This isn't a casual practice. And really thinking about at the right time, communicating clearly and candidly with those funders who might be involved, funders and donors, so that you might get ahead of any disincentives or really talk through any fears about funding being pulled back because of a collaboration, or this notion that, oh gosh, I'm only funding one organization, when if there is a one organization or one program, when in fact if you're bringing two programs together in collaboration, it's going to need perhaps additional funding. So trust. Oh gosh. So it's been my experience that mistrust or reticence is often fueled by fear of uncertainty, of change, of loss of control, all of which are somewhat inherent in moving in a direction of strategic collaboration. We as leaders and managers of organizations are used to kind of being in control within our walls, and this is asking two things. It's asking us to kind of open ourselves up to the outside, which is a feeling of exposure and vulnerability. And two, it's asking us to kind of at times give away some control, or yield control. It is these there's also this feeling of, gosh, it's not the way we do it. And this gets into that kind of culture clash. So there's all different types of way culture manifests itself. But there's also, especially with organizations that have been around for a long time, this the adherence to processes, procedures, ways in which we do things. So this another common theme that I find is, oh gosh, that's not the way we do it, and that tends to be a barrier. To mitigate these, consider partnering with an organization that you have an existing relationship with. You know them, you built up that trust in some way. Um, an initial awareness of an organization's work and their people and their staff and boards can help build that relationship faster. Also, I would say recognizing that you don't have to jump into the deep end first. There's an option to, collaborate toward the left end of the scale first before moving into something deeper, right? There's nothing that says you have to really get in the deep end with somebody first. There are phases and stages. This was easier before COVID, but creating opportunities for staff and board at 2 or more organizations to get together. Food always helped to be able just to have some of that informal time together. And really identify and be honest about gaps and alignments, and address those difficult issues. Be radically honest about those difficult issues early and often. And finally, this is so important, right? Like, write down the commitments. It doesn't have to be a legal tome, right? But at some point when you're ready to enter into what it is, write down those commitments and come and figure out how you're going to come back to that and check in and hold each other accountable to those commitments. I forget who in my career said this, but a handshake works until it doesn't. And that is just so true. And then risk. I put risk in here because, I'm really thinking about financial risk. From a financial perspective, if your organization doesn't have any cash or receivables that they're waiting on, if you don't have any access to money through your line of credit, or your line of credit is fully drawn, if you don't have savings or reserves, and you have a facility with or assets with significant deferred maintenance, right? So you're kind of you have a lot of maintenance that needs to happen. You have very little ability to absorb risk, and that can include risk is also change, right? So entering into a collaboration is risky, and not having cash or access to it increases your risk. And so there's a great saying by Clara Miller, who said, risk minus cash equals crisis. And that is true in any situation. It's certainly, it can be true in collaborations as well. But just naming that to naming that kind of in this moment. So I'm going to move after a sip of water to our assessing how do you start within your organization to assess your options and readiness to collaborate. So first, we want to like I said, I'm big into introspection before we really get to diving in with other people. And the first is to sit down with your team and understand what it is the problem you're solving for. Again, what is the motivating factor for your collaboration? Is it efficiencies? Is it mission expansion? In general, what is it? What issue are you trying to address? Why does this problem or issue matter? How do you know, right? And so I would draw you back to thinking about getting that external input from your community, and why does this still matter? How do you know what voices are informing this decision? Then also get really clear on if you have a time frame. And so and recognizing what that time frame is and articulating what that time frame. So really thinking about what is internally, what are your issues and goals, what are you trying to address, why does it matter, how do you know, and then like what is your and what is your time frame. The next is really saying, my shorthand is always like, how good of a friend are you, right? Do you work well with others? What is your collaborative style? What relationships already exist? Who are your, like, do you have the capacity and skills for relationship management? Understand who you are as a partner. Um, and and really taking a critical look at that. When I do interviews with for my clients, when we're kind of doing kind of assessments, if they're looking for transformation or they're looking for business planning, I'll ask the question, I'll ask the question, are they a good partner? Are they, what are they like to work with? Um, and those are some questions that you might want to ask some of your nearest and dearest friends, organizational friends. Like, what do we like to work with? If you were to give us, if there was one thing that one piece of advice or one thing you could change about working with us, what would it be? What's the smallest change that we could make that would have the biggest impact? Just to get some information about what it's like for you and your organization, like to work with your organization, and just be upfront about and being upfront about that. The third is really talking about your programs, right? What you do, right? And articulate your value, right? So, what does your organization bring to the table? So be it a program or a whole organization or a project, like what are you bringing to the table? What is that you want, in a way, what do you want to offer? And this is in a way a moment to celebrate and to brag. What are your strengths? Why you? What is unique about what you can offer? And so really thinking about, I'm a strengths-based consultant. I look at organizational strengths and look to build on those. And then so really trying to think about what are those strengths and how can you build, and why are they needed, and how can you bring those to the table. And then finally, understanding what support is needed. How do I support those strengths? What is needed to support those strengths, both internally and externally? So this kind of helps in thinking about what you need from a partner, which we'll talk about in a minute. But what gaps exist internally? And then think about, do I have to build those internally? Do I get those externally? And then what resources, money and other other resources are needed or might be needed? So first we want to understand why we're doing this and identify our issues and goals, understand who we are as a partner, understand the value that we're bringing from a programmatic perspective, and then, okay, what kind of support is needed? This is an internal kind of self-reflective assessment. Now, I know that like assessment is sometimes difficult. And I think if you have been to my whole webinar series, the first webinar we did was on organizational self-assessment. And I think Kelton or Phyllis is going to put a link in the chat that links to the webinar recording and the materials. But self-assessment really is really helpful at this moment for organizations, and it really aims to kind of understand our strengths, and it reflects, it says like, kind of where are we right now. I find that when my organizations are thinking of collaborating or partnering, a self-assessment that doesn't have to take a long time can be incredibly helpful and clarifying. What my tips for self-assessment is that it your capacity as an organization is always changing. So just look at your self-assessment as where you are at this moment in time. And then also with self-assessment, you want to invite in multiple perspectives, right? Because I can assess our organization, but my colleague who sits in the desk over or in the Zoom room over from me might look at it differently. And somebody who is my board member might look different, might assess it differently. And so ultimately what we want to think of, what we get back is a shared and fuller understanding of our strengths and our needs, and our strengths and our needs, and that really kind of can help us kind of building our value in our case. So um, as a little review, but then also for folks who, as we're thinking about how do we like, okay, now what do we do? When I think of organizations, they're divided into really, I have organizations, thinking about organizations in five categories, um, 5 areas of organizational strength. The first is really our programs and services. So what do we do and how do we do it? And that's really it's about our work, and our work and our mission. Like, what do we do? How do we do it? Why do we exist? What is that need that we are meeting kind of in our community? The second thing is naturally like, okay, who does the work, right? Those who do it are people in our culture. And those are the people internal to our organization, our staff, our board, our volunteers. It's it's the way we do the work. It's also, the time we have to do the work, right? It's our internal capacity, right? So we have our missions, programs, and services. We have our people and culture, including the time we have to do the work. And then we have kind of organizations have their relationships, right? So those are the external people, groups, organizations, kind of to help us to advance and support our mission and our work, right? It's in these kind of external relationships, the social capital, if you will, that we might find some of our collaborative partners. But we want to take stock of how we want to take stock of those relationships. Are they strong? Who are they? And how can they support us now and in the future? The fourth is systems and operations. Those are kind of the nuts and bolts. It's everything from our technology, our facilities, our infrastructure, the way we do payroll. Like how strong are those systems and operations? And then finally is money. Like, do we have the types and amounts of resources or money to support our programs? Can they be? Can our resources be can we access them? How are they managed? Right. So organizations can have strengths. Organizational strength isn't just about finance, and that might sound funny someone coming from a finance consultant, but an organization can have a really depleted financial picture, but they thrive in programs and services because of the strength of their people and their relationships. An organization can have a ton of finance and money, but if their programs aren't thriving and their relationships aren't good, then their strength might be financial, but it might not be programmatic. So as we're looking at organizations, we all have strengths, and they are not, no one is greater than the other. We have to look at them together. And that's how I approach when we think how I approach collaborations. And how do we think about how does it inform kind of our planning, right? So for programs and services, when we're doing our assessment, we want to be reflective and ask ourselves, okay, well, what do we bring? Where are our strengths? And I'm not going to read this slide to you, but this notion of like, can you reflect on these questions? And then if you wanted to do this full self-assessment in the link that will be provided to you, like understanding our programs in need, understanding our people and our team strength. What do we really bring? How do we think about our community and relationships? Do we have advocates? Who can we call on? What type of support can we depend on from those folks? Our systems and on operations, that's important, right? We have to be able to get to be able to just do our work and to do it in a way that is accurate and timely. And finally, where are we with finance and money? Can we demonstrate that we are, can we show that we are able to manage money? Even if we don't have a lot, can we still manage it? But this leads us to, bringing this all together. and this, I know this might be a very boring slide, but what we want to get to is to say, all right, as an organization, um, like uh, what are we bringing, but then also what are we seeking? If we know what our strengths are in programs and services, or a particular program that we're looking to collaborate on, what are we looking for in a partner? And our people and culture, like what is it, like what is that culture that matches for us? How do we operate as an organization? Our community, or community and relationships, well, what are we looking to enhance there? Or what are we willing to bring? Similar with systems and operations and finance and money. So for example, in relationships, you might have like deep local partnerships and a great reputation, and you're looking for someone with like state level relationships, or an ability to maintain your brand, with even if your a partner has like a great reputation. You might have like long tenure for staff. If you have like long tenured staff, you want to make sure that if you're working with an organization, you want to make sure that like um, there's kind of complementary and also skills, but then also kind of a respect for that tenure, if that is appropriate for you. You're looking for, if you might be looking for a partner with a strong financial leader or an experienced CFO, a committed board, and a culture that is focused on kind of improving internal processes. By going through this assessment, you're really able to think about like what you're bringing and what you need in that partnership. It makes that it fosters transparency, and it also it helps to clarify what you're asking and what you need. So now we want to come back to our spectrum of collaboration. We've kind of identified what our goals are. We understand what we have, and we understand what we need. And then we're going to revisit our spectrum and say, okay, where might we fit on this on the spectrum? Is it that we need to have a formal integration in order to meet these needs? I can't answer that for you, but is it that we might need, is it something less than a formal integration? Is it more operational programmatic venture? Is it a revenue expense sharing model? But I would hope that through the through that process, we'd be able to identify, think about, okay, well, what form follows the function that we have now just walked through, the functions that we have just identified and those needs that we have identified. So I want to talk a little bit about collaborations and money, regardless of kind of where they are. This is just very general. They are not cost neutral. And I yes, just in very baseline terms, I divide kind of the costs of collaboration into two parts. One is kind of our startup and ongoing needs. And those things can be like consultants, feasibility studies, shared technology, accounting, legal, like one-time investments into equipment, that type of stuff. So those are the like one-time costs. The second is really our ongoing operating costs. How long, like what are there incremental costs on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis that are recurring as a result of this collaboration? So we have our one-time startup costs and kind of our ongoing costs. The issue, I don't say the issue, but one of the things that we have to remember is that that we have this undercurrent of cost savings, especially when we get to the side of mergers, and more formal collaborations. We tend to forget about the startup costs and these kind of ongoing costs and the time it takes to get to like a full integration. So we typically don't see those cost savings immediately until we get through the mechanics of integration. So we've gone out through all of that. Now we want to move something forward. So we've clarified our purpose and goals. We've done our organizational assessment. We've centered on mission and community. We've identified a partner. And again, identifying a partner, we've identified what is wanted and needed from our partner. We want to connect to or be connected or introduced to potential partners. This is typically happening at the executive and the board level. And I would say engage trusted advisors in this. Engage your network. From there, and we didn't talk about this in depth because we were really thinking just about the starting phase of this process. We want to think about the assessing like the viability of it, right? So first, we've identified what we bring to the table. We identify what we need in a partner. And then we want to think about, well, where's the match and the mismatch? This is where we're starting to sit across the table from our partner and talk about what can be. We want to create that shared vision. What is it that we see together? What is that what is it that we are willing to build together? Together, ideally, we should think about that structure. We should come with an idea. We should think about what our goes and our no-goes are, like what is completely off the table for us, or what is, something that you're willing to do. And then this last one is really last one on assessing structure and viability is exploring the implications. What does that straw man look like? What might it look like if this were to play out in 3 months, in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years? What is the implications for strategy? What is the implications for our community? And really talk through this. So it's really this is the true planning process, thinking structure and viability. When we move to implementation, you want to write that down, right? We want to think about the implementation plan. How would we do this? We want to think about our written agreement. My advice is always to get outside counsel to look at something like that, especially if there's an exchange of money. But like draft that, write something down. Look at that written agreement. Think about assessment points. When are you going to come back and come together? And what does success look like? How are you going to resolve conflict or issues as when they come up? And then finally, commit to communicating often. And this gets back to just resolving conflict. And you want your partner or your collaborator to be there, and you want to, and this is also part of that trust building as well. It's thinking about we want you to be there when times are good, but also if times things go sideways. So we're winding down, but a couple of questions have been raised in the past, but also in leading up to this around, well, okay, Sandy, what happens if our financial situation is not viable? It's not feasible to merge or collaborate. Our organization has had a rough go at it, and we're not able to turn things around, or like our mission is no longer relevant. And this is perhaps a whole different webinar, but I did want to raise this here. But that organizations may consider dissolving or closing. That is something that organizations do. And frequently it's not talked about. It's not, but it is something that organizations do. It is a viable option for organizations. And again, it's organization by organization. And I'm not going to go into depth on this because I do want to take your questions about collaborations, but I do want to say a couple of 3 things about dissolution and closing of organizations. First, it's a legal process. It is in Massachusetts, and I think everyone's from Massachusetts here. It's run by the State Attorney General's office. And you have to review your bylaws and your articles of incorporation, and organizations do need an attorney or a lawyer to plan and implement the resolution or the dissolution. So it is a legal process. it goes without saying, it impacts people. And in the dissolutions that I've been involved with, it is always better to be candid with staff, board, and constituents, and to engage them if possible. It's not, you're not saving people from anything, and people have their spidey sense and know when an organization is struggling. And I find it always better to be candid with staff, appropriately candid with staff, and keep those lines of communication open. Just like it impacts people, it also impacts your community, however that is defined for you, community and constituents. And the same rule applies. Be candid. I have here pay vendors if possible, with the thought that many of our vendors are community members, or local vendors, and thinking about that as as we are, as an organization is shutting its doors, and that ripple effect of our economy, or our closure on our very local economy, and get in front of negative publicity, right? So really engaging with the press, with social media, and the public, as you're going through this process. And finally, this is a big one for me: steward and celebrate. If an organization is closing, it's required to steward those assets to organizations, mission-driven organizations. Like, the board just can't take all the paintings off the wall, if you will. But those assets have to be stewarded to a like mission organization. So think about stewarding those assets to organizations that value your organization's contribution, right? That are going to honor that in a way that is appropriate. And remember that an organization it many times has become an institution in a community, and it's fitting for the community to both celebrate the accomplishments over the years that it has been a part of the community, and also to mourn it and say goodbye. So steward and celebrate, and take that time to also remember it and mourn it if appropriate. So that's all that I'll say right now about dissolution and closing. But if you have a question about that specifically, I'm happy to take your email on that. But with that, that's all I have for our time today. I feel like on collaborations, we can do so much, but we could not do it in the time. I couldn't do everything in the time we had today, or we would be here for 2 days. But I'm more than happy to take questions. Let's see. Oh. Any questions? Any questions? Kelton, I think I got all the questions that came in from the survey in the presentation, but if there are no questions that are coming in, I am more than happy to connect with anybody. My email is there.
I have a question.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, this is Nestle from
Hi,
Jet.
Nestle.
Yeah, at the beginning you were talking about really where the call for mergers coming primarily from funders. From your experience, do you feel that there is a greater call for minority organization to be merged rather than non-minority organizations? And it seemed to be my experience, and I want to know, have you seen this, and if that, why?
Gosh, that's a great question. I would not be surprised if that was the case, but I don't have any data to prove that. You know what, I would invite you to read Vu Lee's commentary from last week, because he does raise that there. One thing that he does raise is that there is very little, this is true, there is very little data on mergers in the sector. But it would not surprise me.
Yeah, thank you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have Vuli in about 1 hour in a program that I'm doing.
Oh, great.
He's going to talk to a group of people, and that's probably one of the questions that I think we might get to him. But my experience is not only they're asking organization to merge, but also in the Boston area for the last 20 years that I've been here, they also push non-profit organization to dissolve, primarily minority organizations. Like, I remember really about 10 years ago that I started working, you had fledgling, you have good organization in the Haitian community, in Latino community, and African American community. I've seen so many organizations dissolving in those communities. And primarily because people were pushing them to merge, and then the merging situation were not working for them.
Yeah.
So, and I think thanks for the trajectory that you present. Oftentimes, people do not really feel the cultural, the all the nitty gritties of what it takes to really bring two organizations together, and then people really move forward to think that full integration. And most of the time, it doesn't work, and dismantle many very important institutions in the community. Thank you for your work.
You're welcome. One thing I will say, Nestle, is that like the Nestle, that there are that there are philanthropic practices that keep small organizations small. And that is, and I think that can sometimes lead to, that frequently, I'm not saying sometimes, that can lead to organizations that just keeping them financially unstable, and allowing them, and some of those things are like requiring organizations to have a certain budget size in order to access funding, or requiring that 100% of their board members give financial support, or so not recognizing the contributions of non-financial support to organizations, requiring organizations to have a certain number of months of cash reserve. So I will say that there is a lot of that talk in the philanthropic sector right now about what are frankly the structure, the structural inequities that are in the funding practices, that are holding back organizations led by people of color, that we've just taken for granted, or the funding community has just bubbled up around the funding community. Many have called it the wealth preserving practice of philanthropy, and not the charitable practice of philanthropy. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I see we have Patricia, your hand is raised. Do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. I represent a small community-based foundation, and my question was, is there any financial overview of what it costs for two nonprofits to do what you have termed to be a programmatic venture or joint programming? Because when the proposals come to us, we don't know whether the $10,000 requested or the $50,000 requested is more in line with the reality of what it really takes to plan these things out. We know that the first stage that you talked about, which was the information sharing and kind of joint planning, really doesn't take a lot of money to do. And so we know that. But as it gets more integrated, what is the financial ramification, and is there any material that we can get to look at?
Yes, and I can include that in a link or send that to you directly. There is a pretty good breakdown. There's a resource out of La Piana Consulting, and there's also one by Compass Point, and it breaks things down by category, right? So it's more reflective of saying, and I do a lot of this work as well, saying, are we thinking about the right things when we're in our planning? And so it's not saying this should cost $5,000. It's saying, do we have a line item for legal? Do we have a line item for like a program manager? Like, so it's more reflective in saying, do we have, these are the line item expenses that we should expect to see? And it's up to the funder or the grant maker to say that, you know, or have that, I would say, engage in the conversation with the potential grantee to tell me how you built this budget, like where, like, you know, what's the double click on these numbers. So that's how I would approach it, but I can give you some of those resources on what those kind of line items should be.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
Absolutely
because
helpful.
a lot of us that are reading these documents come from other disciplines that have very little to do with nonprofit operation.
I totally get it. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely happy to send that over. Yep.
Sandy, I'd love to chime in on Nestle's question and comment, and have to give a disclaimer that my last several years I was in Orlando, Central Florida, on the funder side. And this is all anecdotal. I don't have any collected data on how widespread, but I certainly have been in conversations with funders who not only are encouraging mergers, but in every case, we're encouraging really the absorption of the organization that was in a primarily person of color community being absorbed under the other organization that was just deemed to be a better financial steward. And it was certainly not the case when you got down into the nitty-gritty of the organization. So it wasn't just that they should merge, but in every case it was the absorption of the other organization into the more Caucasian group. And even when one of the organizations was particularly steeped in the community and had been there 90 years, that was not even a concern. So it's anecdotal, but I would say that from the funder side, it was certainly a frequent conversation, but not said overtly.
Yeah, thank you. And that's my experience. I but wanted to see really what people were thinking. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Any other thing?
And Sandy, you said that you have some breakdown in terms of costs. So do you know where we might be able to access that?
I'm going to send it. I'm going to have Kelton include that in the follow-up email to this with the link to the presentation.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Very simple presentation, very good, right on the money. So thanks for the hard work that you put behind that. We know when it is that good, then you put a lot of work to put it together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Good. All right. If there are no other questions, it was great to see everyone today. Thank you for joining. And if anything pops up, feel free to give me a call or reach out to me via email.
Thanks, Sandy. And I'm going to add my thanks as well. And you will be seeing a follow-up message with Sandy's contact info if you do have any follow-up questions, as well as the resources she's mentioned, and a survey, which we would be so delighted for you to take some time to share your thoughts on the presentation. It'll be shared with Sandy and the community foundations. So I hope everyone has a good rest of your day and that you'll join us for a program in the future. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.